All right, this is going to be Lecture 15, A New Nation Part 2. We've just got done with the end of George Washington's tenure as president and his farewell address. 1796 election is going to be contested between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Right, Adams from New England and Jefferson from Virginia. And the common sort of idea that Jefferson is going to paint Adams as a monarchist, right, pro-kings, all that sort of stuff, comes from the debate over federalism versus republicanism. And Adams was a Federalist, Jefferson is a Republican. Adams is going to win by this narrow margin, as it points out right here, 71 to 68. And at the time, this meant that Thomas Jefferson, with the second most votes, would be the vice president. Now, Adams is going to be stubborn, right? He's going to be really ambitious, but yet at the same time, he's going to really stick to his principles and this idea of trying to rein that back in. He's going to be, possibly bipolar. He's going to be tactless, as it says. He's going to chew out his subordinates, all that sort of stuff. And he definitely did not appeal to the masses, right? He was seen as sort of high and mighty. So when Adams comes into office, right, the major problem he faced was he was, George Washington's successor. That was going to be a difficult situation, hard to fill his shoes, as it said. He didn't get along very well with Alexander Hamilton. And then lastly, he had the problem of the international problems of dealing with France, right? France didn't want America trading with Great Britain, right, due to the fact we didn't pay the debts. They were at war with them. And so they began to attack U.S. shipping. This is going to be referred to as the Quasi-War. And so Adams is going to have to figure out how to end that and keep us out of war with France. The French, not going to be excited about Jay's Treaty, which was clearly a treaty with Britain. Not quite an alliance with Britain, right? More so this idea that it was to keep us out of war with Britain and keep them from invading us, as we discussed in class. And they saw this as a violation of the Franco-American Treaty of 1778, which, as we pointed out in class, the U.S. really had no intention of honoring. To settle the differences with France, John Adams is going to send the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, or the future Chief Justice, I should say, John Marshall, to France basically with 3 more men and part of his sort of secret envoy, to meet with the French Foreign Minister Talleyrand. When they get there, the sort of middlemen, referred to as agents X, Y, and Z, all demand bribes, right, adding up to 32 million florins, and plus a bribe of $250,000 just to meet with Talleyrand. Yet again, this behavior is something one might have been kind of normal in Europe, to pay the bribes and the corruption and all that sort of stuff. But Adams is really going to feel like it's the French trying to push us around and treat us sort of as a backwater. And so that will anger him. But Adams keeps his head, and the whole goal of this will be to keep this information hush so that the people in Congress don't call for war. The terms are going to collapse, right? It's not going to work out. Marshall was hailed as a hero, right, by not giving in to the French. And as it said, the XYZ affair is going to basically incite anger, right? And we're going to hear the term war hawks. These guys are going to be the people in Congress calling now for war with France over the situation. Even though it was a Jeffersonian Congress, the pace for war quickens, as it says. Adams, is going to create the Department of the Navy. They're going to reestablish the Marine Corps and add 3 new ships and authorize 10,000 men. But it never will be fully raised because we don't want to go to war with France, right? Much like we were just talking about with England, we really don't have the capability at this point to fight a war with a big European power. Let's see here, them creating ships for the Navy. So the war, the Quasi-War, as I was telling you, is going to be a naval war, and that's all it's really going to be. Okay, so it's going to happen for about 2.5 years. All right, American privateers in the war capture 80 French vessels. Only a slight push, it seemed, might plunge both nations into full-scale war. So yet again, the idea was we wanted to stay out of a full-scale war. The French wanted to stay out of a war as well. Talleyrand says, if you send a new minister, we'll meet them with the proper respect. By the time they show up, right, Napoleon is now in power, and eventually they're going to work out a treaty. The problem is this treaty is going to be overshadowed by the Alien and Sedition Acts. So, at the convention of 1800, they agree to end the alliance, right? We pay for the damage done during the Quasi-War, and really, as it says right here, Adams doesn't get enough credit for keeping the peace, much like when we talked about Washington. The idea that he kept the environment afloat for the young country to continue to grow. And by having this sort of solid diplomatic effort, he smoothed the relations, which is going to allow Jefferson to purchase Louisiana, right, 3 years later. So now we're going to see the Alien and Sedition Acts, okay? Now, the first one, right, is the alien in the Alien Sedition Acts, namely people from other countries. So if you were from another country, let's put it, you were going to be an immigrant. You're likely going to be poor. So who would you relate more to? The Jeffersonians, right, that wanted everyone to own some land, wanted the voice of the people to be heard, or the Federalists who were about the upper class and, creating factories and stuff like that. So most of these aliens, as it says right there, or immigrants, tended to be Jeffersonians. So what the goal was of the Alien Act was to keep groups of people joining the Jeffersonians and hurting the Federalist cause. So the first thing that's going to happen here is they're going to raise the residency requirement from 5 years to 14 years to becoming a citizen. As it says right here, it violated that policy of speedy assimilation. And the second was, in the time of war, the president could deport foreigners that he saw as basically ne'er-do-wells to the situation. So it was an arbitrary grant of executive power, even though it says it was never enforced. The Alien Sedition Acts, however unpopular, will eventually allowed to expire. Sedition, on the other hand, deals with the freedom of speech. So as it says right here, it slapped at two freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. The freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. So anyone, as it says right there, who impeded the policies of the government or falsely defamed its officials would be liable to a heavy fine and imprisonment, right? If you spoke out against the president, you could be thrown in jail, that kind of thing. As it says right here, many Jeffersonian editors were indicted under it, and 10 brought trial and were convicted, all right? Yet again, the Sedition Act seemed to conflict with the Constitution, and yet again, it was a way to hopefully manipulate this anti-French hysteria. Right? Yet again, that was also the concept behind the Alien Act as well, was to keep the French from infiltrating our society. What does that sound like? So Jefferson feared a possible side to one-party dictatorship, that they would be able to quell the Jeffersonians and the Federalists would just kind of rule with an iron fist. That was the fear. Not exactly sure what's going on in this picture, but I'm assuming it's an argument over the Alien and Sedition Acts. So in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts, we get the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, and they effectively say that states can ignore acts of the federal government if they find them to be unconstitutional. This will be very similar, if not the same thing, when we get to the nullification crisis on the way to the Civil War. So Thomas Jefferson, as it says right here, will secretly pen these for Kentucky, and James Madison will do the same thing for Virginia. They were tied to the social compact theory, right, that they created this government, right, and if the government wasn't doing what they wanted, then they didn't have to listen to it. There's now going to be a bit of a outcry over this, right? Federalist states added ringing condemnations. They argued that the people, not the states, had made the original social compact, and that the Supreme Court, not the states, nullified unconstitutional legislation. But we're not going to get to this until we get to the famous court case of Marbury versus Madison. As I said a couple slides ago, right, this is going to be eventually used for nullification and eventually the ideas of secession by the South in the sort of pre-Civil War period. But this was not the extreme that neither Jefferson nor Madison really wanted to take it to. They really were all about keeping the Union preserved and making the federal government do what they thought was right. Yet again, another breakdown here of what it meant to be a Federalist, right, or a Republican. Federalist, strong central government, loose interpretation, and all about commerce, while Republicans were all about states' rights, strict interpretation, and agriculture. Also not too unfamiliar that, right, Republicans are going to be big Virginians, while Federalists are going to be guys from Massachusetts and New York. Not always, but just gives you some idea on why commerce and agriculture are so important there. More of the same here, right? Hamiltonians or Federalists, right, believe that the wealthy and well-educated should run the government, while Jeffersonian believe the common person could manage public affairs. You can see here basically the problems, right, between the two parties, which takes us eventually to the election of 1800, where this guy, good old Thomas Jefferson, gets elected.